I powered on the recorder the way I had countless times before. A basic test, nothing serious. I wanted a clean track, flat tones, just to check gain levels inside the small studio I built out of a spare room. The walls were dense with foam and memory. There was no reason it shouldn't be silent. Still, habit told me to listen through headphones as I monitored the input dot. At first I thought the faint sound in the background was the neighbor's air unit bleeding through the walls. Or maybe traffic echo carried strangely through the vents. But when I shifted the microphone 2 feet to the left, the noise shifted too. The hum moved with me, as though it was not fixed in the air but tied to the space between me and the mic. I leaned closer. The signal grew clearer. Not mechanical rumble, not fridge compressor, not any familiar vibration. A low drone, smooth and even. It didn't waver like an appliance. It breathed. I sat frozen, watching the levels tremble on the screen. 6 seconds. Dip. 6 seconds. Dip. I laughed nervously to myself, trying to break the tension. Maybe feedback. Maybe my equipment aging in sync with chance coincidence. Still, curiosity lit me up. So I tapped the mic arm. The hum hiccuped once, then steadied again. As though acknowledging the touch, I shut everything down fast, pulled the headphone jack, let silence reclaim the room. I stared at the gray wall, doubting my own ears. But doubt wasn't enough to erase what I felt in my chest. The impression that something had leaned in close when I wasn't looking. Something I'd recorded without asking Dot later. I transferred the file like I always did. I named it with no care, test_01.wav. Neutral, forgettable. I was tired. I told myself I would erase it the next morning. Yet my hand hesitated before dragging it into the trash. Instead, I double-clicked and listened again. Through the headphones, the shape revealed itself stronger. Every 6 seconds, certain as a heartbeat. Not faint after all, but steady, deliberate, unmistakable. I listened straight through, uneasy. 10 minutes captured. 10 minutes of something that shouldn't be there. I thought of all the possible explanations, marching each through my mind. A wireless interference, some neighboring signal. But the pattern wrong-footed each idea. Nothing local stayed that consistent, that precise. Near silence. Then a presence, regular, like breath drawn not from lungs, but from something larger, colder. I pushed back from the desk, heartbeat stuttering. I remembered my father in late nights sitting with headphones, bent over reels of tape. He used to speak of ghost carriers, transmissions that rode beneath stations, unheard until pulled apart. I had dismissed that as obsession. And yet now, in my own headphones, a shadow lived. I sat there longer than I meant to. The quiet hiss filled all gaps. And under it, the drone, calm, patient, waiting. Not aggressive, not intrusive, not yet. Just there, as though aware it had been found. I saved the file again, redundantly, on 2 drives, like I was guarding proof against my future self who might want to deny it. The screen glowed pale, numbers drifting, time mark after time mark, every second tagged while my stomach tightened. I whispered out loud, though no one else was there. Why now? The words went nowhere. The night stretched. I tried lying down in bed, closing eyes, ears ringing. But after minutes, that drone built in memory, replaying without playback. A phantom rhythm pacing my thoughts. Every 6 seconds my brain circled. Breath. Breath. I gave up sleep and returned to the desk. It felt foolish at first, but I mapped it on paper. A line every 6 ticks. 10 pages filled with marks. A plain rhythm, undemanding, infinitely repeating. Empty, yet something about it implied agency. Not random, I considered deleting all of it. Wiping memory cards. Pretending it was never here. But the very idea felt impossible. Proof once captured doesn't uncapture. Files carry weight bodies cannot. Technology remembers better than flesh. I topped the page with a note. First hum. Just 2 words. Naming it gave it shape, recognition, ownership, or maybe surrender. I wasn't sure which. I told myself that tomorrow I'd test again. This time with wider setup. Shielding cables, different mic patterns, time of day shifted. If all stayed silent, I could rest easy. Blame poor grounding. Convince myself. But deep down, I already knew. Silence will not return. I shut lights. Stood in darkness longer than comfortable. The house creaked. The fridge clicked. All normal sounds. Yet woven between them, even with gear off, I swore my ear caught that same pacing presence. Breath like the quiet between tides. I promised myself this. One more night, one more test, then I'd judge. I tried to hold on to the idea of control, of this being my choice. But even as that thought settled, I realized I wasn't chasing anything. I was following. The hum led. I trailed. Tomorrow, I'll set the mics again. I'll wait for silence. Yet it waits too. I suspect no, I know I won't find it. I returned after midnight, hands shaking slightly as I set up the recorder. The room was still heavy with the kind of late-night silence that feels separate from the rest of the day. I checked cables, tightened knobs, and made sure the levels were set. This time I wasn't testing. I was waiting. The old desk light cast a narrow pool across the recorder. My screen glowed faint, showing a flat line of silence. I adjusted the gain higher than I normally would. Every click of my movement rang loud. I sat in the dark with only the hum of my own nerves keeping pace. Minutes, stretched thin, 10, 20, 30. My body started to sag in the chair, the long drag of tiredness pulling at me. Then, at around the 40-minute mark, the recorder shivered alive. A noise flared. Not the faint, distant tone of last night. This was louder, rising, pulling through the air like cloth torn from a hidden wall. Static filled the track, ragged but oddly controlled, like layers stripped back in sequence. Beneath the static, that hum returned firm, confident, laced with new fullness. I leaned into the headphones, heart drumming. The display confirmed it. Peaks every 6 seconds. A structure breathing. It wasn't local interference. Too deliberate. I sat frozen, aware that outside the window the night world still existed, but what pressed against my ears belonged somewhere else entirely. Something vast and invisible had opened a crack. I let the recording run, not daring to move. 40 minutes had been stillness. Now every second carried weight. I tagged the timestamp in my notes 2:12 precise, unavoidable. I knew that meant something. Someone somewhere would find meaning in that number, the way my father always believed. When the sound leveled out again, I carefully stopped the file, saving it before anything could corrupt. The task felt urgent, like carrying fragile evidence. I wrote file_002.wav, primary capture. 2:12 a.m. My handwriting staggered across the page. Later, staring at the waveform, I slowed it down in small increments. Lowering the sample rate, pushed the static lower, deeper, giving room for hidden shapes to appear. That was when I saw it, the embedded tones. Not random scatter. Intervals organized across the file. Like Morse stripped of letters, or music without melody. A code built out of absence and presence. I listened on loop, each cycle etching the sense stronger. The mind wants randomness to resolve into pattern, I told myself. But the gut argued back. No accident keeps pace for so long. No drift holds so steady across the night. This was written. It was someone's intention. Or something's. My chest tightened. The memory of my father came back again, the nights he filled with graphs and reels. He used to tap a pencil along to invisible rhythms, whispering that the air was never empty. Now here I was, tapping too, falling into the same hunger. I sat for hours, pinning marks on the paper. A dot every interval, a line charting their rise. My eyelids sagged, but I pulled them open. Fatigue blurred thought into dream, but the dream felt woken already, buzzing in my ears. The world narrowed to two things: the drone in the headphones and the trail on the page. Everything else fell away. Lights outside, clocks ticking, street noise far off, they all shrank behind the screen's glow. I was alone with a voice that didn't recognize time the way we do. At one point, I leaned too close to the desk, breathing shallow, and had the eerie impression that the recording was breathing back. As though the static wasn't static at all, but an inhalation and exhalation stretched thin until human ears could barely stand it. I whispered again, low, like testing the air. "What are you doing?" Only static answered, yet some stubborn part of me swore the hum deepened right after. Insomnia had its claws deep now. I couldn't rest, couldn't let go. Every time I thought to close the program, I returned to the waveform instead. Pressing slow, pressing reverse, watching symbols arc like sketches left half-finished, each tiny fragment shaped by design. My rational side argued for coincidence again. Yet my stomach told a different truth. I was being drawn in. Hours passed unnoticed. My notes smeared, pen dragging, hand numb. I checked the clock once. 4 in the morning. The whole night gone, and still the signal burned steady in the headphones. Finally, exhaustion forced me to shut the system down. I clicked save, file complete. The computer whirred obediently. I leaned back, eyes raw, chest thinning out into the kind of hollow fatigue that always comes after too much focus. Relief edged in until the recorder screamed. The peak slammed onto the display, climbing and climbing. The screen shook with wild red lines biting across the graph, as though the file had burst open all at once. The noise hammered through my headphones, so high, so dense, it made my teeth ache. I lunged for the keyboard, but the software froze mid-playback. The hum and the static flattened into a single sharp sheet of sound, unlistenable. It held until the system crashed to black. My own reflection stared back in the glossy screen, wide-eyed, breath broken apart like I'd run miles UNWARNED. Had never spiked like that before. Controlled, steady, deliberate, until the moment I tried to step away. Then it lashed out, refusing to be shut down easily. Not random, not faulty software, an insistence. I sat in the dim glow of the powerless monitor, the recorder still hot beneath my palms. The fear was clearer now. This wasn't failing equipment. This wasn't street interference. Something didn't want to be ignored. The next morning, I couldn't erase the sound from my mind. It hung there, even after the recorder went cold and the screen stayed blank. I knew I wouldn't get answers from replaying it again. I needed context, needed something that stretched beyond my small room. That was when I remembered the drawer. It had been years since I touched it. A battered metal file cabinet shoved into the far corner of the storage room. Packed when we cleaned my father's workspace after he died. Half his papers went to recycling, but I kept a drawer's worth without telling anyone why. Maybe guilt, maybe love, maybe an intuition I didn't dare voice. I pulled it loose, coughing as dust shook out across my shirt. The lock was broken years ago, that metal stiff to open. I yanked until it gave way. Inside were folders, mismatched, some labeled, some not. Musty ink smell rose up like another voice, like his presence waited patiently in the paper. The first folder gaped wide with printed graphs. Slanting lines, jagged builds, sudden drops. Frequencies ranged across axes. Numbers penciled in margins, circled hard, guiding arrows so insistent I could almost see his hand dart across the page. Beneath that, photocopies of spectrum maps, heavy static backdrops with patches blacked out, voids where no reception registered. At the bottom of one page, faint but decipherable, his handwriting read, "Entry here, repeat again." Another folder, thicker with stapled clumps, featured messy handwritten notes stapled sideways. Half columns full of strange terms, shadow bans, blind carriers, signal ghosting. His writing tilted urgent, both methodical and explosive. He wasn't just tracking. He was chasing Dot and then the single sheet that froze me. A page all alone. Across the white, dark ink circled a phrase, "Pattern is entry," underlined 3 times. Scribbled as if written in a thunder of thought. Beneath it, no diagrams, no data, no anchor. Just that phrase screaming across decades to land in my hands. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe properly. The pulse in my wrist tapped like a warning. Because beneath last night's waveform, beneath the static peeling back, I had mapped lines not unlike his drawings. His arcs and my arcs mirrored. The hum, the precise interval, it looked too sharp beside the shapes he'd once traced. I turned another page and found a cassette index, numbers listed in sequence. My father must have recorded his own captures. But the tapes were gone. Either lost in cleanup or hidden deeper somewhere else. What remained weren't recordings, but notes written like confessions. One entry stopped my eyes. "The line will echo you." Not random noise. A relay. The handwriting shook, letters trailing like his hand had hesitated across revelation. He was writing as though something whispered to him through the patterns, and my whole body leaned closer across the desk. Like I could sink into the paper and join his reality. I stacked graph over graph until the desk glazed with shapes. Circles overlapping, letters repeating. More and more clearly, it resembled last night's file. I wanted to deny it, to claim coincidence, a trick of memory. But my rational mind buckled under the weight. Whatever I had captured was not new. It was his work, resurfacing through me. A gnawing ache filled my chest. This wasn't random interest anymore. I was standing inside his echo, an inheritance I had ignored until it demanded I return. Recording for a podcast had been my excuse to keep one part of him alive. But what if the work wasn't metaphor at all? What if I was finishing what he started? I remembered how he died alone at his desk, sudden heart failure at 60. They said stress broke him, maybe paranoia. I remembered the nights when I was a kid, creeping to his door, listening to faint tape hiss behind wood walls, the faint rhythm of his muttering at unseen signals. I thought it was sadness. Now I thought maybe it was truth. The word shadow band circled my mind. Not day, not night, but something in between. He scribbled that phrase again and again beside graphs. Shadow is memory. Shadow is hollow, filled. To him, shadows weren't absence, but channels hidden under light. Carriers beneath everything ordinary. One photocopy showed a spectrum curve scratched in ink. Overlaying last night's waveform on screen, the slope matched frighteningly well. He had drawn what I now recorded. Time bent between us, folding his obsession into mine. I whispered, "Dad, what did you see?" My breath stirred the fragile paper. The idea pulled me deeper. Maybe he knew, maybe he was willing to risk the label of eccentric, because the signal had already shown proof. He had always said the world was built on carriers, on invisible transmissions binding life together. We thought he spoke in riddles, but lines on his pages spoke clear now. I touched the phrase again. Pattern is entry. What did entry mean? Entry to where? A door? A map? A conversation? Or a trap? I closed the drawer and sat in silence as dust floated through a beam of morning light. The room pulsed with stillness. The memory of the hum filled the silence anyway. Its presence not gone, only quieter when I wasn't listening. My head dropped into my hands. I thought of the wasted years trying to live far away from his obsessions. How I laughed at late-night theories, rolled my eyes at the boxes of photocopies. Yet here I was, sketching intervals on paper, feeling my pulse quicken when the drone aligned. I felt caught between grief and necessity. His silence still spoke, harder now than when he was alive. What he couldn't finish, I had stumbled into. What he lost himself chasing, I now faced without choice. I tried to rationalize it again, keep a sane distance. Maybe these papers only reflected an engineer's fixation, nothing more. Maybe in my sleepless state, I was imagining links that weren't there. But when I opened the laptop and replayed the night's capture, the hum in his graphs snapped into unity. Frequency mirrored ink. Waves curved like his sketches. A chill settled in. The file on my screen vibrated like a continuation of his pen marks. Like he had left a message not in words, but in living frequency that could carry across time. Energy doesn't vanish. It only changes form. And maybe messages obey the same law. The thought cracked something inside. I realized speaking into the mic, trying to build a story for others, may not have actually been about them. It was for me. For him. For this. The work I dismissed as background for content had shifted into something else. A continuation of unfinished testimony. I looked at my notes stacked beside his, the edges overlapping as though one hand fed into another. No longer coincidence. A partnership across absence. A call waiting for answer. When I finally closed the folder, my hands trembled. I felt him near. Not in memory. In the hum behind my ears, steady, 6 seconds, reminding. I hadn't escaped the line. It has always been waiting. I wasn't only his child anymore. I was his heir. It had been days since I found his notes, and each night the hum thickened in my head like fog. I tried to reason it down, tried to cage it as coincidence, but the lines between Father's sketches and my recordings had already fused. I couldn't separate them anymore. So I reached outward. I needed another voice to tell me whether I was walking into madness or uncovering something that was never supposed to be uncovered. There was one contact I hadn't spoken to in years. A woman I'd interviewed once during a freelance piece about orbital transmissions. Back then she'd worked as a contractor tied to satellite systems. She had hinted about gaps in the logs, regions where signals seemed to vanish. I remembered her caution, how she chose words slowly, aware of what even casual claims could trigger. She was no conspiracy monger. When she spoke, it rang with the kind of technical weight that suggested lived knowledge, not fantasy. I didn't expect her to reply. But my email, hesitant and vague, returned a number with a single line. After midnight. Don't record. So I waited, clock ticking past midnight, lights off in the little studio. The call came at 12:30. Her voice was lower, older, but still sharp. You still working the noise stories? She asked. I swallowed, explained what I'd been hearing. The 6-second pulse, the intervals that aligned to code, the peaks that forced my system to freeze. I told her about the old notes discovered in my father's drawer. Silence held the line for a long beat. I've heard of it, she said finally. Not as you put it, but enough that what you're describing sounds like they're fault lines. Her words dropped with weight. She went on, slowly, as if gauging each step. There are frequencies that vanish from official logs. You will never find them charted. Too neat, too clean, like the record itself had surgery. But if you monitor unprotected bands, amateur scopes, hobbyist recordings, you find traces. Not drift. Not rogue signals. They weren't accidents. They've been built that way. Hidden in plain air. My throat tightened. Covers? Yes, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Intentional. Shadow carriers, built to disappear in supervised spectrum, but leak through uncontrolled channels. Designed inference. If you pull one thread and cross-check with Fourier spectrums, you see the omissions. That's your first proof. Compare it to the hobbyist archives. By what's missing, you know what mattered most. She breathed fast under her words, audible even across the phone. Don't assume you will be allowed to prove it. I've seen careers ended on the suspicion of asking. Reputations dismantled overnight. People ridiculed into silence. It's more effective than threats. Her tone shifted, softer, almost breaking. I don't want you tangled in this. Leave it alone. I gripped the desk edge, unsure if I was grateful or more afraid. Her warning didn't push me back. It pulled me further. Proof lurked in omissions, visible by absence. It fit too perfectly with what I'd found in the notes scrawled by my father. Pattern is entry. Now someone alive admitted the entry existed. She must have sensed my silence or stubbornness. Her final words quivered. I've seen lightning strike for less, she whispered. You don't want to stand tall during it. The line clicked dead so abruptly, I thought it was cut rather than hung up. No chance of calling back. Her voice still hung in my ears. Trembling, yes, but real, I slumped forward in my chair. The room was too quiet again. I wanted to escape the pull, but switching off the gear felt like leaving my post. I sat in stillness, staring at the recorder's idle screen. Then it flickered. A new file appeared, square and solid, as though the machine had birthed it while I watched. The title glowed blank against black. No keystroke had been pressed, no button touched. I hadn't recorded. Yet the recorder believed I had got my chest hollowed with cold. I reached forward with fingers that barely obeyed, pressing play with a single tap dot at first. Only static afield, louder than the ordinary hiss of electronics. Beneath it came the pulse. 6 seconds. Clear and cruel, matching my own heartbeat until I felt unnerved by the synchrony. I leaned closer, straining to hear past the static tarp. And then, threaded faintly between intervals, was the sound of breathing. Not mechanical noise, not white hiss shaped by chance. Breathing. Full, hollow, regular. Someone or something captured me in return. My hand recoiled from the recorder as if burned. Sat all night in the sagging chair, screen glow suspended on my face. The phone call's warning gnawed heavy. Frequencies scrubbed from history, intentional omissions, patterns built to vanish. And now, without my consent, a new file breathed into existence directly in my device. The line between research and intrusion had snapped. I hadn't gone looking this time. It had come looking for me. I woke drained, but I couldn't resist. The file that had appeared last night sat on my desktop like a dare, its plain title bleeding into the silence of the room. My hands shook as I clicked it open. The waveform filled the screen, jagged ridges marching upward into a horizon that glowed with uncanny symmetry. At first playback, it sounded like the usual wall of static. White hiss, loud and even. But my stomach clenched. Beneath it lay something. I listened harder, layers dividing themselves under the headphones, until I could separate them like threads tugged from cloth. The hum arrived slowly, thick and deliberate. Not a stray oscillation anymore. A stretched tone, almost too deep for ears to hold. It rolled clean across the spectrum, steady as breath. I marked the time 51 seconds in, and then leaned back, focusing. My skin prickled as I noticed a quality unlike before. A contour that curved up and down rather than flat. Speech-like, elongated syllables, pulled into vibration until consonants dissolved, leaving only stretched vowels in their place. It wasn't saying words, but it was speaking. I played it again, half speed this time. The rhythm deepened, more human now. My gut turned heavy, as though the sound was shaping air around me, forcing lungs to adjust. Then, 2 minutes in, a new signal entered. A sharper tone, higher, quick against the bass hum, like a second voice pushed into conversation. I froze. It wasn't random cross-signal chaos. It was response. The hum lowered, then the sharp tone cut across. Back and forth, call and answer behind the mask of static. I knew interference. This was not it. This was dialogue. I pulled graphing software into place, mapping peaks against time. As lines touched, they grew patterns of strange beauty. 4 quadrants. Framing arcs. At center, a sudden bloom outward. Slowly, unmistakably, the shape stretched into an eye. Sharp at the edges, rounded beneath. An eye birthed in numbers, staring without light. My skepticism cracked down the center. I sat back, watching pixels assemble into gaze. This wasn't subjective. This wasn't imagination clawing shapes from clouds. The geometry confirmed design. Design means intention. And intention means presence. I brushed a hand across the papers scattered beside me, father's graphs, notes on shadow bands, and felt cold recognition. His work had stumbled here. Now mine had joined. We had both been pulled toward the eye. My chest hollowed with unease. A thought whispered, slow but solid. If the files could appear without me recording, then I wasn't collecting data. I was participating. Not audience, but broadcast. Just by listening, I was part of their chain. I yanked the headphones off. My skin still vibrated with residue. The tones lingered in muscle memory. Moving across the room, I unplugged everything in one rash sweep. Cables pulled loose. Lights snapped dark. My screen froze and sighed away. Silence, sharp and immediate, fell heavy in the room. Yet in my ears, in the hollows behind them, a faint pulse carried on. Like I had been tuned to a frequency myself, body turned receiver. 6 seconds, breath, breath. I pressed fists tight over ears, hard enough to ache, but the rhythm floated inside me, detached from external sound. A private metronome ticking where silence should live. I stumbled from the desk, restless, pacing the hallway until floorboards creaked like warning signs. My mind circled questions but refused answers. Where did the dialogue originate? Was I decoding conversation, or was the conversation using me? I wanted to leave the room, leave the house, leave all the cables behind. Yet wherever I turned, the pulse moved too. No walls blocked it. No distance dulled it. It persisted like it was stitched at the base of being. I sat on the floor against the kitchen door, palms cold, sweat gathering across my chest. I tried humming to myself, matching its pace, hoping to drown it under my own rhythm. But when I went off its timing, the sound surged louder in my head. Correction. As though the broadcast required compliance, I gave up, bracing in silence until the imagined wave eased. Hours blurred before dawn crept pale across the curtains. My body sagged against the wall, exhausted, the faint buzz of that eye shape still carved deep in mind. A truth we resist always claws deeper. I couldn't outrun it. Disconnecting equipment hadn't pulled me out. The difference now was plain. The files didn't belong to hardware. They lived in me too. I crept back to the studio once the sun edged higher. Dust floated golden over desks. Screens dead, recorders still unplugged. Paper graphs everywhere like scattered testimony. Scrawled lines pointing toward silence with no escape. I did not dare switch anything back on. Instead, I sat in the quiet, ears attuned to the phantom pulse. The air seemed to breathe beside me, patient and unhurried. My mind flashed again to my father, how he must have felt when the hum refused to stop. How he wrote, "Pattern is entry," while his own breath fell into rhythm. I covered my face, speaking into the hollow between palms. "What do you want with me?" No answer but the faint, delayed echo in my blood. And yet, somehow that was answer enough. I filed the request half as a test, half as an act of desperation. My inbox had become a graveyard of unanswered queries and dead-end searches, but this one mattered. I keyed in formal words, requested transmission logs from the 1980s archived under National Spectrum reports. Dry language, sterile phrasing, a disguise for hunger. I hit send, half expecting the request to vanish into bureaucracy. Days later, the reply came. A stack of PDFs attached, the emails marked with layers of official disclaimers. I opened the first file with a pulse pounding through my fingers. There it was, empty space. Redaction bars stretched across almost every page, thick black slabs like paint strokes covering text, leaving only polite fragments behind. Still, the human touch betrays itself even in erasure. My eyes searched the margins, the corners, places where care slips and detail leaks. Dates surfaced scattered, inconsistent, like emergency beacons left blinking. One set repeated enough to matter. Coordinates quivered faintly in the corners, a leftover from some copy clerk who didn't erase neatly enough. I cross-checked them, punched them into maps. The points glowed in Nevada. A blank area within desert ranges, miles from ordinary traffic. Military territory. Restricted but not unfamiliar. My stomach twisted. I pulled my father's old pages closer, the ones lifted from his drawer. On one sheet he had circled a similar patch on an old atlas. Red pen bleeding an oblong ring over desert coordinates. This wasn't chance. He had traced the same region I now found from cracked edits inside redactions. His shadow walked with mine. The implication pressed heavier with each note. This was not folklore, not amateur paranoia, not a ghost story spun for late nights. It was continuity. A thread running across decades, through him into me, through erasures into my desk. I sat still, hearing the silence of the room as though it were waiting too. The file I had labeled from the phantom recording rested on my drive. I reached toward it as though touching fire. My finger clicked play, and the hum swelled into the headphones, thick and crawling, but this time I adjusted the volume lower. Down again. I urged it toward silence until the hum was faint as a whisper beneath breath. I tilted closer, ears straining against the near absence. That was when words took shape, not words in the ordinary sense of language. More like sound that formed the ghost of syllables, the impression of speech layered beneath tone. Shapes at the edge of hearing teased at recognition. For a stunned second, I thought it was my own name. Drawn out, heavy, dissolving in static. I yanked the headphones down, chest rattled. Distortion thickened the air, though the speakers now lay mute. The house walls felt too thin, brittle against the unseen pressure. I sat with fists locked against the desk. Papers lay scattered, maps pulsing with marks. The files told me one message plain. The sound wasn't locked in tape or disc. It held a destination, a pole. It wanted presence. It wanted me there. The logs, the gaps, the coordinates, the whispered words. They converged in silence, pressing hard until my bones heard them. Nevada. The desert. Where my father circled before me. I switched the headphones back on with care, forcing my ears to brace the near quiet again. Yes, there in the noise's softest fold, a shape tough to hide. Something speaking from under layers, forming syllables that clung to consciousness even after the hum dropped. I let the volume hover just above zero, long enough to prove it wasn't fleeting imagination. Then I stopped. My hand trembled as I pressed save, marked the moment, locked it behind dated file names. The room seemed to wait for me to respond. Any sound I made felt like reply, and the words that clawed limp from the hum clung stubbornly to thought even in silence. Whispering across memory where no sound should reach. At almost nothing. The voice lived. The drive out was long. Hours poured into a flat stretch of road where the desert swallowed horizon on all sides. I kept the radio off, unwilling to hear music, unwilling to let anything contaminate the silence I'd already grown addicted to. Each mile pressed deeper into absence, until cell bars vanished and the noise of the city became something mythic in memory. The borrowed gear rattled in the seat beside me. A portable recorder, a parabolic mic heavy with its circular dish, and a wideband scanner that whined faintly even when switched off. Tools of amateurs maybe, but sufficient to hook whispers out of the air if whispers wanted to surface. I packed water, a camping stove, blankets. Normal things to disguise the edges of what wasn't normal at all. By the time night arrived, I had slipped off the highway onto a dirt road that thinned into gravel. I parked the pickup where rock walls shielded me from view, if there was any view besides stars themselves. I killed the engine. Silence roared so thick the ticking of the cooling hood sounded like hammer strikes. I set up camp with clumsy hands. The desert air cut cold at night, and even double layers didn't offer comfort. I planted the tripod, locked the parabolic dish in place, and clipped cables into the portable recorder. Tiny red lights blinked alive. The wideband scanner whirred with dials cycling, numbers blurring too fast to hold. A spectrum empty of anything human. Hours passed. Silence etched tighter. Coyotes called far off, one or two, then nothing again. I sat in the pickup bed wrapped in blanket, watching the stars. There were more of them here than city skies ever reveal, a dense quilt of points stretching until my neck cramped. Some light traveled 100 million years to reach my retina. I reminded myself of that as if reassurance. Still, comparing that vast travel to the steady hum in my head, the stars felt smaller. I let the recorder run. 2 hours. 3. Nothing more than the shuffle of wind. By 4 a.m., my eyes burned, lids heavy, body sagging. Silence layered so deep that every shift of cloth felt sacrilegious. There was nothing. No signal, no gift, no whisper. But as dawn threatened, it happened. The wideband scanner stopped. Just stopped. Freeze on the readout, gray line locking flat. Its display didn't dim, didn't flicker, only held a silent refusal. At the same instant, the parabolic leapt alive, needles slamming high across the meter. My recorder sprang with activity, peaking so violently the casing vibrate, and through the headphones came a surge so deep it rattled my ribcage. The low sound wasn't just captured, wasn't only heard. It was felt through the pickup bed beneath me, broadcasting through steel into spine. I gasped. It was alive. Not mechanical, not accidental. An intention radiated from the vibration. I gripped the mic stand, though it shook despite me. The hum wasn't steady like the old files. It built in volume and shape, bending into waves that shifted direction across seconds. It pressed into me like a question. Fear gripped hard. I slammed the switch, closed the recorder. The surge collapsed instantly. Silence roared back, but heavier this time. Like something had retreated after realizing it had shown too much. My hands trembled as I pulled the card, stuffed it into laptop, and replayed what I had just captured. The screen bloomed with a waveform unlike any I had seen, thick, heavy strokes followed by collapse into lines, vertical towers carved into silence. At first it defied recognition. Then the towers arranged in a way that chilled deeper than any alien imagination. Numbers emerged. Latitude, longitude, my GPS coordinates. I stared, stomach hollowing out. The signal had mirrored my location. Not guesswork, exact, a precision so clean that it tore open the question of coincidence. No, not even a question remained. The file repeated those coordinates again and again. A chant seared into static. I leaned back from the screen, dizzy, nauseated. If the signal knew where I was, then I was no longer listening in secret. It had listened back. Wind shifted across the desert, cold fingers wrapping the camp in sudden chill. I fumbled, shutting laptop, yanking the parabolic dish loose. I shoved everything into its case, not bothering with careful order. The metal groaned against my panic. I slammed the case shut. The desert dawn crept pallid across ridges, painting them dull amber. Normal world returned, but nothing inside me matched normal anymore. I sat there, shaking, hands pressed to knees, realizing my presence had been tagged in return, unwanted intimacy. Recognition returned. I whispered out loud into the empty valley, though no one should have been able to hear. "You saw me." And truth responded in the silence itself. It arrived in my inbox wrapped in a single line. "You'll want this." No explanation, no greeting. Just a link to a transfer file hosted on some unstable server. The kind of sketchy corner only people who lived inside forums bothered with. Curiosity outweighed caution. I clicked, downloaded, and found the file labeled bluntly, 1991_cassette. The waveform looked wrong before I even pressed play. Too uneven, too jagged, and carrying an odd slant of hiss across the top. Not digital hiss, the kind that spills when compression fails, but the heavier, dirtier roll of magnetic tape. I recognized the sound before hearing it. The way one recognizes the unique, bleak weather of another decade. I steadied my hands, hit play, and leaned into headphones. First came noise, flat tape hiss. Then a click. The spinning rumble of a tape machine, clunky with age. A man's breath trembled in the near field of some cheap mic, close enough that I could picture his lips almost grazing foam. "I don't know what to call it," he said. His voice broke in stammers, nervous, almost defeated. "But it's there. I know it's there." He described the hum. 6 seconds. Low, steady. A rhythm he couldn't shake after first hearing it. He told how at night it deepened, curling around the edges of dreams. "It opened something," he whispered. His words caught so sharp I wanted to pause, but I couldn't. "A door. Not the kind you walk through. One you feel in memory." He paused, breathing harsh. I could hear faint creaks in his chair, little domestic noises framing terror inside ordinary space. Then he spoke faster, pressured, as though afraid the tape would run out before he finished. "I swear, after it showed, people didn't stay themselves. Not exactly. They came back, edited, saying something else than what I heard the night before. They answered wrong. They said things they hadn't said, like..." Gaps filled with another voice wearing their faces. His language tilted strange and jagged, but the meaning was sharp enough to sting my skin. Replacements, not of body but of speech. Substitutions within memory. People reshaped between days. His voice faltered. I heard them in the daylight, saying one thing like nothing happened. But the next night, in dreams, they whispered another version. 2 truths in one throat. Day belonged to them. Night belonged to shadows. The tape hiss rose, drowning him. He panicked, the mic scraping as if shoved away. Then, at the 12-minute mark, sound cracked. A new voice edged in, not human exactly, stretched into distorted laughter. Not joyous laughter, something cracked, brittle, metallic. It hummed behind the man's own breathing until neither voice could be cleanly separated. The tape rolled a few seconds further in shrieking distortion, then cut dead. Silence returned to my headphones. Heavy and suffocating, I sat immobile, still staring at the waveform, whose last moments slashed upward with deliberate spikes. Oddly patterned, no ordinary distortion shape. My pulse banged high in my temples. When I finally moved, I tore into the file metadata. I looked for splices, edits, hidden fingerprints, anything to brand it counterfeit. None surfaced. Its signature sat firmly in the range of analog digitization. Old cassette flutter, wow and flutter in frequency drifts. Tape hiss specific to ferric oxide particles. Vintage noise. No edits. If this was forgery, it was masterful enough to outmatch my sense of detection. So what I heard was archived truth. Someone 3 decades earlier captured the exact hum I now hunted. And someone felt compelled to confess into tape the same effects that had begun tugging at my world. Uploaded it as secondary backup. Desperate not to lose the only evidence beyond my recordings and my father's scrawls. But even the upload misbehaved. Progress crawled at a rate too slow to match my connection. Bytes trickled as if strangled. At times it froze entirely before resuming in hesitant stutters. Like the file itself resisted replacement or relocation, I left it through the night, watching bars crawl from single digits toward 40%, then stall again. A frustration so palpable, I muttered sharp words into the cold air. Yet deeper inside, another thought swelled. Maybe this wasn't technical error. Maybe something in the file refused to duplicate, as if it knew truth's replication would diminish its power. By dawn, the transfer completed. Copy secure, yet incomplete in spirit. The original lived heavier than any backup, as though essence muted, once dragged into another medium. I replayed the last hiss often, the brittle laughter cutting short. It scraped memory each time more deeply. I tried capturing it again through screen recording, only to hear tiny differences in waveform each repetition, as though the file shifted slightly when handled, maintaining oneself only in first playback. What horrified me most wasn't the laughter itself, but the recognition. The exact rhythm beneath it was this 6-second hum. Long vowels shaped into mockery. The same foundation I'd traced in my room, in the desert, now staged into derision long before I was listening. And it left me with a fear more potent than replacement or surveillance. A fear born of recognition. The laughter had been waiting, knowing listeners would arrive decades later, knowing I would sit in my dim little studio, trembling to it, file open, headphones on. Told through static, some truths resist archiving, and worse, some truths choose their heirs. I spent the day layering files one over another, like transparent sheets stacked on a lightbox. My original captures. The phantom file that appeared unsolicited. And now the digitized cassette from 1991. I aligned them by hand at first, sliding waveforms so the hum peaks balanced out neatly. But no matter how I shifted, they seemed already aligned. Every 6 seconds, on the mark. 30 years apart and still pulsing with one steady rhythm, not drift. No soft adjustment explaining it. Precision. Exactness that humbled even engineered signals. It was like they had been meant to fit, slots molded ahead of time for recordings, not yet created. I printed graphs, pinned them to the wall with leftover tape. From a distance, lines cascaded downward into one another, timed not just across months but decades. Dates collapsed under the truth of resonance. A pattern lived behind time, not alongside it. My phone buzzed. At first I thought I imagined it, but the light blinked insistently. A message from the insider, short and sharp. They used time like space. I stared. Those 4 words hit like a hammer. Use time like space. Not merely spanning years by accident. Designed leverage. Anchoring across memory as if temporality itself were just geography mapped. My breath fought against my ribs. The warning followed a few seconds later. Stop, but I didn't. The files weighted themselves, pulling me forward. Ignoring her plea felt inevitable. There is no stopping gravity once a body is already falling. I set the playback system to run them all at once. I synced them carefully, aligning start points, trimming the ends. Then I pressed all into motion together. The room groaned. Headphones nearly blasted against my ears, so I pulled them off in panic. Yet even through the open air the sound thickened, weighted like stone pressing down from above. The layered hums folded into each other, filling space beyond sound. The lights flickered first. Bulbs stuttering, dim, then bright, then erratic as though power grids themselves were infected with resonance. The air felt not empty, but charged. I breathed shallow, chest crackling as though static smoldered inside. Nothing ordinary explained this. My sockets weren't overloading. Breakers stayed steady. Yet the sound itself shaped the atmosphere. I stepped toward the desk and felt resistance, too subtle to define. A pressure that thickened with each inch. It was resonance, but more than sound. A density of presence. I shut my eyes and imagined a curtain stretching thin, stretched to the very edge of rupture. I felt behind it something aware, pushing its weight against the fabric. I whispered, half to myself, half to it, "Do you hear me?" No answer, not in any conventional shape. But resonance responded. A subtle deepening, the hum sharpening into near tone, like a palm pressed harder from the other side of fragile glass. Fear streaked down my spine, yet so did wonder. My mind split in two directions, one screaming to stop, one demanding to continue knocking. Both voices trembled equal. I stepped back, pulse hammering, surrounded by furniture rattling faintly in sympathy. The graphs taped to the wall shifted as if breathed on. It hadn't opened, not entirely. No literal portal lay waiting in the room. And yet I knew proximity had thinned the line between us. I felt perilously close to something broad and sentient pushing through. I cut playback abruptly. The sound vanished with brutal silence. Lights steadied. Pressure ebbed, though not fully. Something about the air remained bruised. As though touched, I sat in the chair, shaking. My rational mind fought to recapture footing. I had proved continuity across decades. I had proved alignment across voices and tapes. But proof didn't lessen dread. Proof worsened it, because proof meant intention. On the wall, my pinned sheets fluttered weakly in the fading air currents. Their lines all met at one mark. 6 seconds. 30 years. Endless repetitions carved an unseen path across history. A map not on surfaces but behind them. A grid drawn through time itself. The insider's words replayed. They used time like space. A chilling metaphor. Or maybe not a metaphor at all. Maybe the recordings weren't just echoes. Maybe they were structural, like bridges crossing years. Scaffolding that held something up or something in. I rubbed my temples, exhaustion searing through me. Yet I couldn't retreat. Not now. The weight of my father's notes. The 1991 tape. The phantom file naming me. Even my drive out to Nevada. They braided together too tight. And behind each event, that gaze. The bloom of the eye I had traced earlier in the waveforms. Watching, unblinking, I returned to the desk, staring at the dead screen, daring myself to press play again. But I resisted for now. The memory of flickering bulbs too fresh, the feeling of pressure too sharp. I couldn't withstand more tonight, but standing at the edge of a hidden chamber, I realized something terrible. Even if I closed the files forever, I had already knocked, and something, somewhere, had heard. It happened at 3 a.m. sharp. I hadn't touched the desk in hours. Hadn't dared open the files again after the resonance shook the room. I tried distracting myself with books, pacing, even leaving the house for a long cold walk through empty streets. By the time I returned, I'd convinced myself the pressure would ease if I starved it. I would not press play. I would not sit in the dark testing my sanity against static. But the recorder decided for me. At exactly 3. Its light flared. Green power LED igniting like an eye-opening in darkness. No command, no touch. The machine clicked alive, screen scrolling like fingers moved invisible. A new file began recording itself. I stared, helpless, as the timer crawled upward. 10 minutes later, the LED clicked off. The file sat there on the screen, neat and confident, stamped with the time. Heart cold. I pressed play. Immediately, the room filled with distortion brutal enough to flay nerves. Not the hollow hum alone. This was full broadcast. Jagged waves slamming against each other like storms meeting head-on. Beneath the harsh waves, faintly so faint at first I doubted, I heard syllables. My name. Stretched, torn, but unmistakable. My name slurred in elongated crawl, phonemes bending into near-inhuman music. Not said once, but repeated. Spoken like a beacon across noise, the sound struck panic through my chest. I scrambled for the phone. Fingers clumsy, I dialed the insider's number. Straight to silence. A second try, same. No ring, no rejection. Nothing. I returned to the desk, trembling, forcing myself to listen again. This time with the volume lower, ears pressed against headphones as though pressing closer might clarify. Beneath the distortion, beneath my name stretched out like a slow blade, I caught new layers. Not one voice, but many braided together, weaving in and out. Male and female tones laced into one another, all muttering in proximity. Not coherent sentences, but cadence too careful to dismiss. The mechanical distortion shaped their edges into sawteeth, twisting the chorus into something not quite human. I slowed the file, dropping pitch, extending time, drawing strands out into shapes made visible. That was when new coordinates emerged. At first a single number whispered, distorted. Then another, strung together over intervals. I matched them reluctantly, scratching into paper. My throat tightened as the final digits fell into alignment. Not desert now. Not Nevada. The numbers pointed to ocean out beyond land, past anything reachable by quick drive. Deep water coordinates floating north of known routes. My body slumped against the desk. Everything shifted in that instant. This wasn't rural static curling around empty signals. This wasn't coincidence of where I happened to point a bollock dish. This was wide, intentional, global. Transmission spanning seas and years, using time like a medium to draw a lattice across more than one place. My name inside it proved I was locked in mesh. The thought clawed down my throat like ice. What began as a fascination for forgotten frequencies had twisted itself into cartography. A map not of landlines or towers, but of control points anchored in earth and water alike. And I wasn't mapping it, they were mapping me. My mind clawed for rational escape. Could it be military bounce scatter off the ionosphere? Rogue trawler signals from shipping lanes? But the exactness of my name destroyed every excuse. No experiment spills out speech that leaches identity. No drift produces coordinates pinned to second decimals. I played the file again, desperate to disprove itself. My skepticism fractured further. Each minute bled certainty deeper into me. Voices branched like veins under distortion, weaving as though the static itself carried architecture. Networks disguised as noise. The 10 minutes ended in sudden cut, no fade, no wind down. As if a door had slammed shut on cue. Leaving me alone again, headphones hanging limp from hand. The silence after was worse than the broadcast. It throbbed with residue, like the room had been filleted open and stitched unfinished. I wanted to scream, to smash the recorder. But destroying it would erase proof. And proof was all I had left to wrestle my mind from delusion. I dragged myself onto the floor, leaning against the wall, staring at ceiling cracks. My breathing rasped raw. Midpoint. I knew it. Whatever narrative I thought I was building in a niche corner of sound mania had broken its center and buckled into something else. Not personal exploration anymore. Not documentary curiosity. An enforced participation. This podcast I curated for scraps of interest was not mine now. It had warped, twisted by unknown design into a map. My files strung together deliberately, like coordinates in a larger chain. Somebody wanted to use me, or something did. I pressed my palms together, face hidden in the small cave of my hands. I thought of my father again. His scrawled words, pattern his entry. I thought of his obsession that looked like madness until now. Maybe he too had reached this midpoint and felt the fall. Maybe this was the cliff edge that claimed him. I dared glance back at the recorder. Still, silent, normal. That blankness taunted me worse than the broadcast itself. 10 minutes of presence, then withdrawal. Like proving control meant proving absence could be owned too. I cued the file again, one more time slow. Whispering under breath so faint no one could hear, I heard you. Some truths demand acknowledgement, even if it means surrender. The ocean. The coordinates from the 3 a.m. broadcast pulled my eyes over endless blue. No desert ranges this time, no dry land to anchor against. Just salt water, rolling constant, unbroken. I began with maritime logs, combing dull records until my patience thinned. But scattered between weather archives and buoy reports, gaps showed. Not gaps in text, but anomalies. Buoys stalled in their transmissions at precise times, only to return without explanation. Each interruption aligned eerily close to the coordinates stitched into my recording. Cold files forgot these notes, buried in databases without cross-check. Yet the moment I plotted them beside my recording's hum arcs, the match was undeniable. Their spikes, my spikes, overlays as if drafted by the same hand. A chorus singing across decades, stitched through salt. I dug deeper, scrolling until eyes ached. Interference not attributed to storms, not seafloor faults. Interference marked only as unidentified. Engineers shrugged across line items. Officials archived silence. The screen's glow burned midnight blue into my eyes, but tension spurred me too awake to rest. What lived beneath the surface sang in my drives. Proof of continuity, darker than land-based secrets. Then her name blinked again on my phone. The Insider. After days of nothing, her frantic pulse returned through text and broken call. Her voice cracked when I answered. "You looked into ocean files." "Yes," I whispered, already feeling heat stab through chest. "You shouldn't. The ocean is where they built the mirrors." The phrase hung heavy. Mirrors? She didn't explain. They reflect, amplify, contain. That's why the recordings work best there. Why data arcs grow sharper. Salt holds resonance like cavity walls. You press sound into water, it doesn't only carry, it grows. Doubles back. Don't test it. Don't. The line fractured into static. I tried redial, but her number folded into silence as before. Gone again, leaving only the trembling phrase. Built mirrors. I stared at the coordinates lit on the map. I considered what testing at sea even meant. Every instinct told me no. Every instinct told me she was right, but an opposing pull said otherwise. To understand something larger meant contact. And contact sometimes meant disregard for instinct. By dawn I drove toward the coast with a parabolic mic, recorder, and a backpack of cables. The highway stretched me toward water until the salt air hit my lungs sharp and raw. Standing at the edge of crashing waves, I felt dizzy, as though the line between sky and sea was blurred into one rolling wall. I chose a spot away from tourists, away from fishermen. A narrow jetty where concrete arms reached into water. I set the tripod near the edge, anchored against wind. The parabolic dish aimed out across waves. My recorder armed with blank file, red light pulsing steady. I let atmosphere record. Seagulls shrieked. Waves battered stone. Wind chased foam along surface. Hours passed with only ordinary life etched onto tape. Frustration gnawed. I heard nothing. Saw nothing. Belief faltered against raw emptiness. But when the sun began to crawl back toward horizon, the shift came. My headphones punched with sound so low, so hidden in water, I almost missed it. A crawl vibrating under surf roar. At first subtle, then growing, folding upon itself. Not a song of machines. Not waves alone. Deliberate resonance pressed into me through the dish. The hum had returned. Fatter, heavier, as though water itself carried it upward. My breath caught. I let recording lengthen, hands clenched against knees. Against frantic warning, I pulled in proof. When night fell, I returned to car, loading the file into laptop. I hesitated. Every memory of warning lined up in my head. Don't test it, don't amplify. But hesitation bent into hunger. I pressed play. The playback filled not just ears but marrow. I felt it in wrists, in spine, in skull bone. The sound rippled inside me. It bypassed hearing and spoke into tissue. Every 6-second pulse vibrated ribs like hollow shells. I yanked headphones free, but the resonance remained internal. My body vibrating past will. It was not tolerable. My lungs suffered as though air thickened into slow syrup between each breath. I slammed the laptop shut. My body shivered, skin crawling under invisible touch. Echoes lingered despite silence, as if listening once meant never unlistening. I stumbled outside into sea air. Cool salt wind should have cleansed me, should have silenced the ghost tone. But it followed, rising faint every time waves crested. Mirrors. She was right. The ocean had reflected something back into me, and once carried into flesh, resonance refused to disperse. My legs buckled near the jetty wall. Salt spray-coated lips, metallic, grim. I pressed palms to ears like a child refusing scold. But the pulse was in bone now, shaking behind the barricade of flesh. Every breath felt like surrender. I crouched there, whispering promises against crashing waves, swearing I wouldn't play it again, swearing I'd burn the file if need be. But inside, voice cracked. Too late, because the water had already heard me. And in return, it answered. I convinced myself control was possible. That by orchestrating the chaos, layering every file with precision, I could expose the source. For days I prepped, aligning tracks, smoothing glitches. I labeled folders, time-stamped each wave. The hum from the phantom file. The 3M broadcast. The desert surge. The ocean resonance. All loaded into sequence like instruments searching for one final chord. The studio glowed hollow in lamplight. The hush of midnight outside pressing tight. My hands trembled as I brought the cursor over the run button. I told myself, deliberate, careful, measured. This was my test, not surrender but experiment. The first seconds felt controlled enough. The tracks pulsed against each other, beats weaving awkwardly but not unmanageable. Peaks aligned 6 seconds, then again, then again. I scribbled notes, graphs flaring with overlap. Something hovered in the structure, a nearly visible frame too large to hold in one view. Then the sound thickened. A sharp bulge across levels, louder than I'd intended. Lights on the console burst into red, needles slamming max. My monitor bloom flickered as though drowning in brightness. I yanked headphone jack free, but now the resonance swam through the room itself. Thin objects clattered faint against shelves, driven into sympathy by vibrations. My stomach dropped. The layers had fed into one another, amplifying beyond tolerance. The recorder sparked, little blue arcs spitting along casing. Cables shook. My laptop fan screamed high. I reached for a kill switch futility. The button jammed, unresponsive. The room screamed. A throbbing cast in walls announced itself like a living body flexing. Air felt metallic on my tongue. My vision jittered as monitor lines strobed on and off, each frame flashing seconds of alien script I couldn't hold. Then everything collapsed. Clicks burst sharp. Drives chirped in death. The screen collapsed to black. Smoke whispered the faint stink of fried circuits. The rich silence afterward fell like an executioner's swing. I sat there stunned, chest shaking with pulse. My notes littered the desk. Endless hours obliterated. 10 files. Dozens of captured intervals. Patterns layered from decades all gone in single surge. I touched power key again. The machine looped, half alive, screen jerking through endless restart cycle. Windows whispered open, then died again. Blink, crash, die, repeat. Failure rang heavy. I tasted it bitter in my throat. My obsession had carried me here only to swallow me whole. I traded days, nights, and fragments of sanity to stand before nothing but burned silence and dead drives. I sat in the empty, ashamed. I thought of my father buried under his notes and reels. Perhaps his fate was inevitable, that obsession ensures erasure. That chasing the hum only dissolves the chaser. For the first time, despair sat sharp enough I considered leaving it all, surrendering the room to ashen circuits. But then I noticed it. On my desktop, one icon remained. No folder, no extension, blank, as if no operating system wanted to claim it. The title printed across in neat stark text. You are listening. I froze. No file by that name had ever lived on my drive. No backup had been labeled so. It had appeared through the collapse itself, surviving what destroyed everything else. I waited, staring back at it, too horrified to double-click, too entranced to back away. My mind severed into two halves, refusal and inevitability. One voice screamed, "Don't." Another whispered, "You must." With hands not fully my own, I tapped it alive. The screen darkened around the play window. At first no waveform appeared at all, just black void scrolling forward. Then sound seeped into headphones. It was my voice. Clean, direct, undeniable. Hearing myself without memory of recording rattled something primal, something unnatural. Words cracked from my throat as though across time itself. I described things I had not yet done. Phrases like "driving west again" and "standing beneath the tower" filled the file. Detailed notes of steps not yet taken, but phrased from my tone, my framing. Intimate familiarity. I felt bile burn my throat. Prophecy or manipulation. The voice that was me spoke in calm rhythm, even as I fell apart listening. It laid out thoughts I hadn't reached, movements I hadn't scheduled. It marched ahead of me like illustrated fate, pulling me toward actions pre-written. I tried pressing stop. Nothing. The cursor ignored commands. Once more, "You are listening." It droned steady, proof or curse. My body shook against chair's frame. Because if the file was genuine, then either future had already hardened around me, or something wore my voice as bait. To lead me like a puppet strung by static. The file ran until I ripped power cord, heart hammering. Screen died. Headphones silent. But syllables still echoed in mind exactly as spoken. Standing beneath the tower. I closed eyes, breath fractured. The prophecy lived sharper than warning. And with each thought resisting, another part of me whispered, "It is only a matter of time." I traveled to Washington in desperation. Sleepless from the failure of the broadcast and the file that spoke with my own voice. Logic told me answers lived in official records. That if I touched the paper directly instead of staring at digital redactions, I might break past whatever had been erased. The reading room was quiet as ritual. Large high ceilings, muted lamps, shoes squeaking over marble. I filled out requests, listing box numbers from Spectrum reports of the 1980s. I waited, hands folded, every breath scratching against the silence of bureaucracy. When the clerk delivered the first set, my heart surged only to collapse. What I received were copies so clean they unnerved me. Pages white to the edge, data so neat there was no falseness needed. Spreadsheets too perfect, everything symmetrical. Sterile records that smelled like fresh toner, not old paper. It wasn't silence from absence. It was silence imposed. Oh wait. Intentional, deliberate erasure. I flipped sheet after sheet, looking for mistakes, human cracks, fingerprints from clerks distracted by fatigue. Nothing. No hint of human. Frustration swelled to breaking point. And then gently, a hand touched the edge of my table. A librarian I hadn't noticed before. Older, face sagging into lines, retreating as if part of the building itself. She didn't speak. Her fingers slid a folded note across the table. I unfolded it. "Try sub-basement. Shelf 12. The words chilled me more than welcoming me. The suggestion was impossible. I wasn't cleared. And yet curiosity shrouded fear. I slipped the note into pocket, packed notes as if leaving. Then found stairs spiraling downward into cool air. Each landing grew dustier. The public face above gave way to neglect. Paint peeled, the ceilings unfinished. The smell dampened into stone. The sub-basement spread as a hollow corridor, racks stacked in rows. Dim bulbs cast islands of orange across floor. Shelf markers tagged each direction. I found 12 after long walk, my breath growing ragged with the weight of trespass. Among neglected cardboard boxes sat reels of magnetic tape stacked uneven. Labels handwritten in fading ink. Dead stations. Calsigns no longer alive. WJLI, KMNF. Station names that ended decades prior. The reels shivered at my touch, cold despite air heavy with summer heat. I lifted one, spooled with brown tape that glistened faint under bulb. Faint handwriting in the margin, July 1983, 2:06 a.m. I found a reel machine, half broken but functional, in corner meant for archivist use. Plugged it in. Threaded tape against guides, turned the wheel until it snagged. The speakers hissed wide when I pressed play. Dust crackled. And then 30 minutes of nothing. At least, almost nothing. It was silence so deep it chilled bone. Not tape hiss, not household ambience. A measured emptiness carved into storage, but faint beneath my heart stuttered. A hum. Low, careful, irregular through decades of dust. Familiar. My studio hum. The tone I'd captured in my own recordings, except this was dated July 1983. 7 years before I was born. My stomach soured into sickness. Fingers pressed against temple, breathing fast, chest hammering with disbelief. I listened harder. Every 6 seconds, yes, the identical pulse, as if the reel had bottled my present and laid it in their past. The silence itself seemed to look back. I wanted to stop tape, but couldn't. I couldn't turn away from hearing myself reflected across time's wall. Questions scraped loud inside skull. How could my studio be heard through a reel captured decades earlier? What had recorded me before I existed? I shut the tape finally, reels spinning down into hungry stop. My skin prickled violently. The silence of that basement pressed tighter. Carrying the reel back to shelf, I nearly dropped it. My hands shook so heavy I had to brace with both arms. I shoved it back out of view, as if hiding crime. Then I sprinted out. Stairs spiraling upward, lungs tearing, until white sterile rooms of surface swallowed me once more. But inside me, the hum had not stopped. Back in the daylight, staring at the note crumpled in my pocket, I thought of the faint sound threading decades, lacing silence with my own future presence, and the dread rooted clear. If archive reels had recorded me before birth, then whatever listened was not bound by years. My skin crawled. What has heard me across all these years now? The call came without warning, jittering my phone alive at an hour I had stopped expecting to hear from her at all. Her voice leapt raw into my ear, not calm, not guarded, but breathless, frantic. "I don't know what's happening anymore," she gasped. "People I worked with are wrong. We meet, and they talk about projects as if they never existed, whole chains of work wiped clean. They smile at me, hand me files, but when I point out the gaps, the looks I get, like I'm saying nonsense. They've been overwritten. Years of memory, gone, rewritten." Her tone cracked, high with panic. "They don't even know. They believe their false history over their own work. I'm the one out of step now, the last to hold what really happened. And even I," her words stammered into breath, into static, a collapse that threaded through her voice until signal shredded. "Even I," then nothing. Just harsh white noise slashing in ears. I pulled the phone away, stared at screen, dialed her back. No answer. I tried again. Just blank silence. The call had fractured her mid-sentence. The void swallowed her entire presence in a breath. Hours later, numb and raw, I returned to the recorder, replaying the call I had captured almost without meaning to. The rush of panic I'd first heard bled through the speakers. She told me of overwritten people, of stolen projects, of her terror. And then came the static collapse again. But while playing back, something unnatural surfaced. The hiss did not remain chaotic. It grew organized, forming lines, patches coalescing into clarity. Her words reassembled themselves, but as I leaned close to listen, I realized these were not hers anymore. The phrasing had shifted, cold, methodical. They used her breath only as raw material. The new voice warned me, "Stop sharing files," it said. "Stop or you will become just another gap." I froze in place, skin prickling as though eyes tracked me through the channels. Gap. That's how she had described her. Colleagues who misremembered erasures filled with false edits. Now the message swore the same fate for me. The signal made itself clear. Their scope widened. Her words, once frantic warnings from a fragile human voice, were twisted into weapon. Even allies melted into tools. I sat back trembling, bone deep. My recorder hissed still, steady and patient, as though shaping air into cadence. When I breathed, I realized it followed. The rise and fall of static mirrored lungs, a living respiration coiled against mine. For the first time wholly, I felt unsafe. Not unsafe because of what was hidden beyond me, but unsafe here in the papered silence of my own house. No room neutral anymore. Every recording could betray me. Every file could bleed words not my own. My phone could stammer into distortions at any moment, weaving warnings, threats, promises, pieces of me torn and repurposed. The hum returned faint behind the hiss, strokes slow as a predator at safe distance. Not attacking, but letting me know it could. 6 seconds and dip. 6 seconds and rise. Like lungs reminding my own of hierarchy. I killed power on the recorder, but it didn't ease the dread. Silence deepened, pressing down harder, showing me absence was only another disguise for presence. I walked through the house, switching lights, checking windows. Nothing moved. No one stood outside. And yet the walls themselves no longer accepted loyalty. I heard soft hiss as though bleeding through layers of plaster, crawling past copper wires. It was everywhere now. Not confined to reels or tapes or files. A contagion made of signal, inhabiting all channels. When I closed my eyes to steady, I mistook my pulse for rhythm, my breath for hum. But then I opened them and still heard it, still felt the hiss forming cadence exactly at rib height, as though copying lungs against me. I folded against the kitchen counter, stomach twisting. A single thought broke my chest open with terror. If all allies veer into tools, if words themselves can be hijacked, then what is left of me untouched? I whispered into the dead air, heart stuttering raw. "Please stop. Please leave me." Silence answered, thick as tar. And still, beneath, hiding yet deliberate, cadence breathed on. I woke to messages. Thousands at first, then more. Some short, "What the hell?" Others confused, worried, some mocking in tone. I rubbed sleep out of my eyes, groggy, until screenshots began dropping into my inbox. My podcast feed, my vault of carefully built episodes, had been sabotaged. I opened one clip. My own voice filled the room. But the words weren't mine. Not even close. Gone were the careful notes, the measured accounts. Instead, this version of me ranted wildly about conspiracies so outrageous, so cartoonish, they torched every ounce of credibility I had built. Reptilian cabals, secret moon colonies, false histories invented by voices in toothpaste commercials, all delivered in my tone, my cadence, stitched into my throat like puppet strings. The blood drained out of me. Friends wrote directly. "Is this a joke? You okay? Why are you doing this now?" Then the unsubscribes pinged. Followers melted away through my metrics, numbers slashed from counters. Their strategy dawned clear: ridicule. Not threat, not removal. Drowning signal in mockery. If no one trusted me, then every frequency I exposed became waste. They didn't need to erase me. They only needed to laugh me into silence. I sat staring at the cursor over login page. Trying to regain admin control. Passwords rejected. Recovery questions warped. Someone had burrowed deep. Every attempt I made looped me back into walls. Blocked out by shadows far slicker than ordinary malice, I felt the humiliation scald across my skin. Everything I had become, every obsessive night staring at static, reduced to noise jester carnival. Outlandish nonsense disguised in my imprint. Friends would avoid me, strangers sneer. Insiders dismiss once and for all. Rage replaced despair. I listened again, not for sense, but for texture. My voice ranted about machines hidden under pyramids, about satellites built of bone. Absurdities stacked higher every second. But under the cheap edits, beneath the sound bed, something beckoned. I slid headphones against ears and stripped frequencies. I slowed playback, sharpened filters low cut. And then I heard it, the hum. 6 seconds, dip rise. Bedded neatly beneath every shriek of falsehood. Carved with perfect precision so no one else would bother tuning their ear low enough to notice. Lurking under the smear like an ink signature behind painted graffiti. Proof. Hiding openly in ridicule. The laughter rising online mocked me. Tore my heart open, yet the discovery hardened resolve all over again. Their camouflage was in parody. Evidence disguised as comedy. But to anyone who dared listen deeper, the same cadence persisted. Their spine was still humming. The humiliation still burned fierce. My own contacts turned cold, assuming I had become another in the long line of noise merchants, chasing clout and fiction. I read texts twice, 3 times, wishing tone might shift, that they might still believe me. But they didn't. Isolation stretched wide. I turned speakers loud. Louder, flooding my studio with their doctored version until walls trembled. Their fake sentences filled air. And beneath, steady as anyone willing to dive low, the hum carried on like ghost breath. I sat there trembling, divided between despair and certainty. They had proven themselves again. Somebody wasn't deleting me. They were writing me into puppet shows, rewriting me through perception itself. Stretching their hand directly into trust and cutting strings one by one. But I possessed a key they didn't. Anticipate. The will to listen beyond surface. And that key glowed hotter than shame. Proof lives hidden where laughter shields it. Control burrows not by deletion, but by stitching lies over truth until only ridicule survives. I leaned into recording, whispering into the drowned air, my fists clenched tight. I still hear you. And the hum answered back behind falsity. Steady, confident, unhurried. I drove under an assumed name, rented under false ID, kept receipts minimal. The gear came heavy in flight cases, military surplus spectrum analyzers, and an oversized parabolic antenna, built to scoop whispers from air thousands of feet distant. I loaded them into the hatch of a borrowed car, hands itching with paranoia. Each block I studied mirrors, certain I was followed. Each turn I waited for traffic to match me beat for beat, but no tail ever showed. The fear came from inside now, stitched into me by every hum. The hunt stretched across weeks. I mapped erratic bursts recorded as I traveled east from city to city, road by road. I tracked spikes threaded faint through shopping malls. Forgotten warehouses, edges of universities where leftover transmitters had bled through. Always the hum. 6 seconds, a rhythm that refused to die. It seemed less like a sound and more like a skeleton hidden beneath the world. One night, the analyzer flared brighter than ever. Not drift, not random scatter-fixed origin. I froze in the driver's seat, staring as the numbers anchored solid, refusing to fade. The line pointed to one location outside Baltimore, a cracked pin of land where an old broadcast tower slumped under corroded steel. Fenced off, for close to memory. I knew then I had found it. I stood on the road staring at its silhouette, skeletal steel scratching at moon. The yards around festered with weeds, rusted signage proclaiming safety warnings from decades back. The fence sagged easy, breachable. I waited until the world around sank into silence, then slid through a torn gap. The closer I came, the more the parabolic screamed into my headset. Its roar bled like storm surge pressing through iron drums. My recorder staggered, lights flashing fever fast. I should have turned back. But step by step I approached, boots crunching gravel swallowed by weeds dotted its base. The search ended. My hands tingled near the support beams. The tall steel ribs seemed alive, faintly buzzing, as though carrying currents not admitted or charted by any innocent grid. I aimed the mic directly upward, and almost immediately a jet of interference carved across recording with violence. White noise collapsed into tonal strokes, and inside it dashed syllables that not hints, not accidents of pareidolia, clear enough to make my throat swell. Stay. A single command, shredded into static teeth, but unmistakable. I reeled back like struck, heart clawing at ribs. But compulsion pulled me close again. I pressed my palm against the cold rust of the girder. The sensation shocked. The steel vibrated beneath skin, a purr deeper than audible, a rumble crawling bone. Rhythm matched 6 seconds still. Pressure thickened through muscle, as if the tower itself breathed. I pressed ear closer. The sound shifted not into words, but into pressure points inside skull. Images flared unbidden. A shaft beneath ground, hollow space carved under foundation, a network unseen. My eyes locked wide. For the first time I felt depth. Proof that what called wasn't just above radiating skyward, it also rooted downward into Earth, hidden from casual scans. Each second I touched the beam worsened the sensation. My stomach twisted. Air stank faint metallic. I staggered back only to find the echo of syllable pressing inward again. Stay, the recorder in my grip sputtered. Waveform surged uncontrollably. Lines stretched into glyphs not of human alphabet. My laptop screen, hooked in via field cable, screamed visual fractals, blooming eyes, radial shapes repeated. I slapped keys uselessly, but more glyphs blossomed blister fast. Panic rose, but deeper still, beneath raw terror, another compulsion burned. Sound didn't just ask. It issued direction. It wanted me here. Wanted me to sink deeper than fence. Deeper than rust. Deeper than time's official erasures. I pulled headphones off, gasping. My body staggered. The fence loomed 20 yards beyond, but I couldn't move toward it. The message still drilled between ribs, ordering compliance not as threat, but as inevitability. The tower creaked above, dark bones tilting under moonlight, alive with unseen circuits. No power lines entered it, not visibly. Yet faint pulses still beat its veins. My palm remembered vibration, even in open air. The word returned, vibrating without headphones, thudding through inward ear. Stay. I understood something final then. This wasn't simple transmission. This was occupation. The sound lattice bound to steel, to soil, burrowing. And within its depth lay whatever lived at other end. For the first time in my pursuit, obsession shifted. No more chasing whispers. Now whispers chased me. I clutched case shut, wrestled myself from foothold around its girder, stepping backward until fence scraped spine. Breath heaved, lungs trembling. Yet still, through chest, pulse pressed commandments. Stay. My skin burned raw where palm had touched metal. An afterprint refused to fade, as though surface had etched instruction into bone. I pulled hood overhead, fled past weeds, headlights slicing me back into oblivion of road. But miles away, unspooling onto freeway, heart refused ease. Because sound didn't recede. It pulled me inward still. The return trip was not choice. It was compulsion. The word had imprinted on me, stay, yet I fled that first night. The guilt of disobedience ate at me like static lodged inside marrow. So I came back, a crowbar in the trunk, gloves in my pocket, mind a blur between fear and hunger. The tower loomed the same. Rust against low cloud, hollow whisper in metal bones. I slipped fast through the broken fence, hugging shadows. Beneath its base, the frame of weeds parted. That's where I found it. A hatch flush with ground, unmarked, concrete lip veined with corrosion. Bolted tight. I knelt, palms sweating despite the cold night air, jammed the crowbar under its lip. Muscles knotted, metal groaned. The echo rang wrong deep, cavernous, not hollow like ordinary soil. My chest thudded. With one final haul, the bolt screamed and tore loose. The hatch cracked open. Cool, stale air rose, tinged metallic. I lowered myself down a ladder eaten with rust, into concrete. The hatch clanged shut above, burying me. Only damp echo remained. My recorder clicked alive in trembling hands. The first steps into the hall came with resonance so faint it felt like vibration inside teeth. The air carried sound not fully heard, blurred like murmurs drifting from another room. The corridor bent inward. Concrete damp, mold patching seams. I walked by pale beam of headlamp, recorder steady. Each few steps I clicked it off, listened hard. What it captured echoed later in headphones, distorted whispers that resembled description. When I slowed playback, I reeled. The recordings mapped ahead of me, described corridors before I reached them. In my ears, playback murmured of a left bend where my eyes saw nothing yet. 50 feet on, a left bend appeared, exactly so, foreshadowing sealed in audio. The tape was a guide, one step faster than me. Deeper I pressed, heart roiling, each playback like prophecy through static. My brain fractured around the implication. The act of recording bled future into me, mapping path I hadn't walked. Stairs descended. The headlamp bobbed across stains on walls, black streaks like fingers dragged. The recorder hissed, then hummed. I slowed the pitch and nearly dropped the device. My name, in faint echo, preceded me down the steps, whispered as if welcoming. I forced legs to keep moving. Fear burned behind ribs, but curiosity harnessed it like bit to bridle dot at the lowest reach. A chamber opened, larger than expected. A squat room walled in thick concrete, ceiling draped with rusted piping. At its center sat a console, not modern, not advanced. Ancient hardware, brushed metal tinged with green patina, switches fat as knuckles, tape reels stilled yet intact. Lights blinked faint, like breath too weak to die. I approached in silence. My hands hovered at its frame. A machine left in sleep, awake only enough to show presence. The recorder warmed in my hand. I pressed record again. Instantly waveforms screamed across my laptop screen, no input needed. The cursor moved without me, drawing glyphs instead of lines. Scrawling weight across black background, a map stretched upward. A mesh spreading outward and inward, nets blooming into fractals. Not random illustration. Something vast, stretching beneath me. Latticework grid unfolding as though peeling back the skin of globe itself. I lost breath. Sweat slicked across back. The net curved around, not simply under the tower, but expanding well beyond city, beyond coast, control net. Or prison. For minutes the screen worked without hands. Glyphs wrote themselves, not of my language, not charts I understood, but patterns I felt as cages tightening. Circles locking circles. Nets above nets. I thought of my father's scribble. Pattern is entry. I thought of the warnings. They use time like space. Here, buried below rust and concrete, entry roared, breath jagged. A single thought split me. Was I standing beneath control, or had I stepped within it already? The console hummed deeper. I pressed stop, but the recorder laughed, screamed lines pouring still without command. Drowning space in maps. I shut my laptop hard. The glow still leaked between scenes as though refusing shut. I turned, heart booming, eyes locked to stairwell behind. Darkness taller than me waiting, and the hum pressed closer, coaxing as though I wasn't interloper here. as though I was part of the structure all along. I staggered backward and whispered to empty concrete, "Am I outside looking in, or inside already?" No answer came. Only the echo of my voice spliced into static from the recorder, repeating my question back to me, distorted, doubled. With a cruel certainty, the console waited for me as if it had been breathing all these years, counting down the seconds to my arrival. Its faint lights pulsed irregular, but always in groups of 6. Even its idleness mocked me. My laptop cable dangled loose in my hand. I knew what connecting would mean in opening, a handshake across time I couldn't undo. But compulsion outweighed sanity. I jacked the cable in. The console hummed, low at first, then thick enough to knock air from chest. My laptop screen blinked, then bled into motion as file windows unfurled uncommanded. Glyphs ran lines I couldn't parse. Numbers cascaded downwards, looping until they became rhythm. I hovered my fingers over keys, but froze at the recognition. This wasn't me typing. Something else had already taken command. The download began without prompt. First trickles, kilobytes. Then roaring flood. Gigabytes stacked like bricks falling from the sky. So many I thought the drive would shatter. The progress bar blurred. What filled my machine wasn't code alone. It was sound. Thousands of files unrolled one after the other, waveforms stitched from static. At first meaningless hiss, until peaks sharpened into recognition, I staggered. These were mine. Every waveform I had kept, every stray hum I'd captured, every recording since the first test session. Dates stretching years. Pieces I hadn't even uploaded or named, all there. Seamlessly cataloged. The screen scrolled deeper, pulling archives I never digitized. My father's real shapes I knew only from handwriting, now mirrored as digital graphs drawn with precision. Not approximation. Exact replicate IONS. Then my blood thickened ice. New files appeared, conversations I'd never recorded at all. Words I remembered saying across childhood bedrooms, across long-gone apartments, across memories no tape had touched, shouts with friends, arguments with family, whispers in grief. My voice grafted whole, displayed now as captured files I never made. Proof of watching. Proof nothing was ever private. Even memory wasn't mine. I pressed hands to desk edge so hard knuckles burned white. Fear cracked into fury. My spine filled with fire instead of chill. They had taken everything, years of tape, every grain of voice, and owned it as their ledger. My mind belonged to their archive. My father's belonged. And maybe everyone's. The files continued spilling. My laptop groaned hot. Fans screamed high tone. Casing rattled. Storage numbers climbed until screen warned of overflow. I clawed external drives from bag, slammed them onto table, jacked cables in shaking fists. One after another, the spread resumed, pouring itself like floodwater into any container near. I copied as much as drives would hold, greed and rage sparking my hands. In each waveform I saw violation and yet proof undeniable. They were watching still, but proof is power too. For once, my desperation would mean more than silence. When finally I pulled the cord from console, when I snapped the handshake, the world around me rebelled. Alarms screamed, but not mechanical alarms. Not bells, not sirens. Sound filled the air itself, grotesque resonance vibrating my skull. My teeth ached under pressure, knees buckled. The hum rose to crushing level, as though the building exhaled pure noise. Concrete underfoot trembled. Pipes rattled above. The stale air folded in waves thick enough to choke. I stumbled backward. Arms clamped against ears, though the sound already pierced spine. My laptop display convulsed, fractals spiraling fast. Drive icons distorting into eyes before vanishing. Whatever I had triggered was not designed to let go. The entire chamber screamed, breathless but unrelenting. I dropped to knees. Fear lashed again. surging past anger until both mingled into one burning truth. I had stolen something that wanted possession back. I scrambled to my feet, slamming external drives into pack, ignoring the heat blistering hands. The console's lights pulsed frantic now, each blink more aggressive than the last. The doorless concrete felt too small, too heavy, too close. I ran, climbing the stairs two at a time, lungs ripped raw. Every step vibrated under the signal clawing from walls, singing into marrow. When I blasted out through hatch, night air hit like thunderclap release. The tower above thrummed alive, every steel girder trembling with same resonance. It joined sky to soil in a chord, strong enough I thought atmosphere itself might tear. I crashed through fence tier, back into car, drives jammed into passenger seat. Behind me, the signal didn't cease. It followed, unheard yet tangible, knotted in body like infection. I shifted gear, tires chewing gravel, sweat soaking shirt. The air outside still vibrated. I pressed foot heavier on accelerator, knowing distance no longer meant escape, because whatever reached me in that chamber still lived inside chest cavity. I had carried part of it free. And more. It had reached into me first. The drive back from Baltimore felt endless. My hands clutched the wheel so tight, the skin split, ragged at the nails. I thought distance would lessen pressure. But miles stretched, and the resonance followed, pulsing in the hollow cage of chest. No matter how far I fled, asphalt, east or west. Radios along the route betrayed me first. I flipped one on out of habit, hoping local news would steady nerves. Every frequency locked instead onto signals that didn't exist. Stations unlicensed, numbers outside registry. All of them hissing with static laced by that 6-second pulse. A net trailing me no matter where dials swung. When I passed beneath power lines, headlights flickered. The cable hum overhead throbbed visibly in rhythm with the drives buzzing against passenger seat. My stolen proof synchronized itself to the grid. Sucking breath from night. At home, the sense worsened. I plugged the drives into main tower, desperate to push archive online before unseen hands erased them. My screen spat warnings, but I ignored each blade of panic. I built an upload pipeline, multiple mirrors all firing at once. A trickle meant to outpace deletion. For minutes it worked. Green bars climbed, raw sound spilling into cloud caches. But mid-transfer, the fiber severed. Not by cut cords, not by network outage. Root commands scrolled across my log without human operator, shutting gates one after another. My upstream felt a ruin, as if arteries clamped under unseen hand. The system sealed itself. I watched channels burn white. Emergency frequencies, normally silent unless storms or surveillance moved, flooded now with static. Police bands, aviation chatter, even maritime wavelengths drowned by the hum. The sound was colonizing. Infrastructure bent in real time to house it. I stumbled back from desk, breathing sharp. My phone shrieked with alerts until screen went black. In the distance, blocks of city dimmed there bright, power surging in sync. The hum timed its breath into the city grid. Through fear's raw spine, strategy flickered clear. Their survival depended on invisibility. For decades they whispered beneath noise, fooling observers, hiding inside neglected bands. They never erased outright. They ridiculed, they erased by replacement, they overstated into farce. A net survived best when unseen. So if visibility arrived wholesale, collapse followed. Exposure was poisoned. An idea bled in, my only option. My own last dangerous cut. Go live. Broadcast raw. Let the world hear what I had heard. With no filter left, no layer of explanation. One terrible transmission, a vein split open into public ear. Not curated, not controlled. Just unmasked contact delivered at once. Once files bled out that way, there could be no taking them back. I paced the room. Every device hissed. Even the vent shuddered miles of hidden tone. I thought of father hunched with reels. I thought of the insider, her voice shredded mid-breath. I thought of tapes from 1991, the laughter cutting so brittle. And I saw the net straining above me, fibers quivering. One irreversible act, broadcast live and risk annihilation from the thing that craved invisibility. Or stay silent and watch years collapse into ridicule, erased calm. The drives buzzed near my hand, blood warm. I stared into the screen's blind reflection, pulse sinking unwillingly to that steady 6-second beat, and I knew with cold certainty there was no way left but forward. I armed the system like prepping for execution. Every drive hooked in, every mic leave, every circuit open. I bypassed safety gates, patched lines messy with cables, stacked the feeds all at once. My hand hovered over the final key. For once I didn't test, didn't second guess. I just pressed. The signal ripped out of me. First a surge, louder than the quiet room could contain. Then a crash, lines choking, then clearing, then coughing alive again. My voice bled with hum braided with tones. Tones laced with static so brutal that the walls themselves rattled. And then it spread. Messages blinked fast. Listeners in scattered towns wrote within minutes. Lights flickering across houses. Radios chiming open even when powered off. Laptops spitting distorted speech through speakers muted seconds before. Some confessed to whispers on recordings they swore they hadn't made, voices calling them by names not theirs. I sat frozen, breath jagged, screen lighting, eyes ghost green. For 1 hour straight, proof rained from every quarter. Screenshots, descriptions, trembled accounts typed too fast to spell. The hum I had borne like wound now walked across their rooms too. I should have felt triumph. Instead came dread. Not because of silence, but because of what happened after. It ended abruptly. No fade, no collapse of system. Just silence. Wide, deep, unnatural silence. The kind of silence that feels curated. I spoke into mic but nothing carried out. My console blinked weak error codes. Uploads all flatlined. Phones went dead. Networks closed blunt. 1 second proof lived. Next second entire memory blank. Then slowly, systems returned. Screens normalized. Radios tuned back to weather and morning chatter. Power grids beat as though stable all along. Officially, it hadn't happened, but my message boards withered. Audience shrank overnight. Subscriptions dissolved as if viewers had only dreamed proof and forced themselves awake. Credibility wrecked. It didn't matter. I kept one lamp burning, headphones waiting, drives ready. Because each night after, when I pressed play, a new wrongness grew. The files no longer repeated exact. They bent, reshaped, breathing variation like lungs twitching in darkness. Sometimes shriller, sometimes whisper low. Sometimes a phrase half-formed inside static, demanding to be caught before disappearing into hiss once more. I realized it wasn't archive anymore. It was dialogue still alive, waiting for attention. I became conduit, prisoner, maybe both. If information is intrusion, then I am an open wound. The door hasn't closed, and someone is still listening.